Do you ever wonder why you act the way you act when you're mad and frustrated? Do you sometimes surprise yourself and do things that are kind of silly that you wish you hadn't done, or said things you wish you wouldn't have said? I've been there, I've done that, and so have most of us. Hi, I'm Pam Vredevelt, your online emotional health coach, and I am here today with Dr. Swarner, and so thankful that he is joining us again for the second time. And we're continuing our study on anger. Now, for those of you that didn't hear part one last week, please go back and check that out, because Dr. Swarner gave us some excellent overview of the brain and brain chemistry and how anger acts in the brain, and also a really good tip. Welcome, Dr. Swarner. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Pam. It's always fun to be with you and a pleasure. Thanks.
So we started last time. One of the tips that you gave us was, in order to kind of turn down the heat and increase more of our peace, is to take emotional inventory. Help us with a little recap on that.
Well, emotional inventory has at least three parts, and that is kind of understanding what you're feeling. And that involves everything from your senses to the other aspects of emotions, which is your memory, what you remember about what you're sensing or what you've had experience before relative to what you're going through, as well as your priorities or your filtering. And that is why something has become really important. So it's got the three parts to our emotional aspects of especially anger. Anger is the loudest of our emotions, and it tends to drown everything else out. It really suppresses our ability to even feel positive emotional experiences when we're intensely angry. So we really have to look at it with very intense seriousness to understand how it's working in our brains.
I remember one of the things that you taught me early on, probably 30 years ago, when we talked and I was serving some of the clients you referred to me. You talked about how anger is a secondary emotion, that typically there are other things underneath driving it. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, right. Anger is what we kind of lump it all under, but anger, as we generalized it, is really the need or the decision that you want something to change. Something needs to be different. Something isn't right. And you've got to make the call. What is it isn't right? What is it you want to change? So it's kind of a secondary overlaying emotional thing. There's other things underneath about what's not right, what's hurting, what's lost, what's threatening, what's dangerous, what feels bad. There's so many aspects that need to be seen as primary beneath the umbrella, if you will, of anger.
So let's break this down. Let's say that we have somebody that's at the office and got a coworker that's just being really a pill, just being hard on him, being kind of snide, and just not a very positive person to be around. And this individual starts feeling a little hot under the collar about how this other coworker is treating her or him. What might be some of the energy underneath that anger that might be driving the anger?
In each individual circumstance, we'd have to give reason to that person, say it's okay to be angry first. The first place you have to start, it's okay to feel like this is uncomfortable and I want something to change. But what might be underneath that is how this is impacting their life. And from memory, is this replicating or replaying some intense losses or threats or criticism or difficulty, like, oh, this always happens to me just when I'm trying to do a good job. Somebody comes up and is critical or distracts me. And so we have to look at the other factors underlying. Why is this such a high priority all of a sudden? Given it is.
Yep, that's an injustice, right? Nobody likes to be treated or mistreated like that. But to kind of get a handle on what's going on in us with that is really important.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the priority of why this feeling we're experiencing is important, and giving oneself permission to accept that it is. Don't start off by saying, "Oh, I shouldn't be angry. I've got to get rid of this." No, it's just now take it to the next level. How to appropriately deal with this? How important is this injustice in my life and in the lives of those around me? In other words, it matters. Now, what are the ways in which we can look at it behaviorally that'll work or haven't worked in the past?
Excellent. I love the fact that you talk about we need to give ourselves permission to be angry, because oftentimes when I'm talking with women in the counseling office, on one level, they have the kind of a dialogue going on inside that I'm so angry, I'm so frustrated. In this circumstance, it would be I'm being mistreated at the office, or I'm being mistreated in my job, or not valued. And, there's just that bad feeling there, an angry feeling. And then on this level is another kind of dialogue going on that's really hard on themselves about feeling angry. I shouldn't feel angry. I should get my act together. I shouldn't be frustrated. And boy, if there's anything I try to do is let's get rid of the commentary of the critic inside, get rid of that, and let's just look at this with observation, non-judgmental observation. Put your science hat on and let's look at this. What is going on there?
That's right. The first place to start, and I will change the example just slightly to being a child going into the dentist and telling the child, this isn't going to hurt. Wait a minute. That's like telling yourself, I shouldn't be angry, I shouldn't feel hurt, I shouldn't feel bad. It's like, it's starting with a lie to yourself. The first place to start is, I do feel hurt. For whatever reason, I feel something should change. I don't feel comfortable in this situation. And that's the place one has to give permission to yourself to feel uncomfortable or whatever you're feeling. Then you can more logically develop a route to follow with that need to change something.
Yes, and that route word, I like that, because when we've talked before, you've mentioned how we've got to route, or we've got to express the anger in a way that's constructive. Because if we don't do that, what are we doing? We're internalizing it, and we're suppressing it, stuffing it, pushing it down, and that brings harm to our mental health as well as to our physical bodies. So let's take that example. That's good. What would that behavioral repertoire look like, and how would we begin to work with that?
Well, that's certainly the first step, is repressing anger. It really does very little good. Maybe to temporarily repress it in the middle of church or the middle of a service of some type where it's totally inappropriate, but those are just brief, hopefully. So the first thing is not to try to stuff it, because that does a lot of emotional damage to yourself, even if it's a minor injustice. To at least give oneself credit for what you're feeling and observing and noticing. Along with that, I would have to add, maybe limit the amount of places you subject yourself, like watching the news. If the news is just constantly making you angry, it's like, okay, you got to turn some things down that you can turn down and pick your battles. But definitely in this situation that we're talking about, try to look at what your options are, and certainly assess what you've done in the past that hasn't worked. If you've complained to your boss, or if you've yelled at this person, or if you've put tacks in their chair, if you've done little passive aggressive things to make their life uncomfortable that aren't effective, you really have to be brutally honest with yourself and saying, okay, let's get serious. If I'm going to do something about this, first of all, I give myself credit for being angry. It's something I need to change. Let's look at it effectively and see what my repertoires are, what I've done in the past. Punching somebody out, that's just a reaction, a D-jerk, I'd call it. So you want a planned behavior. You want something that you can think through, a route that will try to accomplish something that's effective. And you establish a goal. You try to say, well, this is what I really would like to get to happen here. A realistic goal is the next step. And then you look back at what you've done and what has not worked. Hopefully you don't have to spend an eon amount of time deciding all the mistakes I've made in the past. Well, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. And coming up with something either novel or more effective.
Yeah, so let's think about the person that may be listening today, and they know that they haven't handled things well in the past, and they want some ideas. How could they go about adding some new choices? What might some of those choices be?
Well, I always like to start with, is there something positive in this situation? Is there something about that person you want to change that you like? Is there something that person does that's very valuable? It always helps to start with something positive rather than start with diving right into the worst possible character the flaw that you want to see change in this person. So it sometimes really helps to build on whatever positive there is, whatever common ground you might have to start on.
That's really good. That's really good. And sometimes when people are hard on others like that, generally it's because there's some kind of incredible wounding in their past, or maybe some incredible stress in the present, or a combination of the two. And it helps me to put on a pair of compassion glasses, so to speak, even though my emotions might not want to. Just stepping back and breathing and putting on a pair of compassion glasses and looking at it from a distance, like, what could be going on here that's driving that?
Yeah. You have to assess the person. If there's a person here that you're angry at, you're not just angry at the car or angry at the government or angry at taxes. You have to assess. If we're talking about anger at a person's behavior or a person's repeated behavior, you do have to make an assessment. Is this person that I'm angry with or want change from really able to engage with me? Or are they so far out of the picture that they're not in tune? Yeah. If they are, then it's always a safer starting place to approach that person and say, when this happens, is there something I can do to help? In other words, you're not approaching them immediately saying, look, you do this, I want you to stop doing that. But it's usually a better bargaining position to approach it with, is there something that I can do to help diffuse the situation or improve it? That makes sense to you? Oh,
I like that a lot. And just a good starting point with that, that's simple, I think, is just commenting on the obvious, commenting on the behavior that you notice. That I noticed that you seemed pretty frustrated the other day about such and such, and is there anything that I can do, or is there any way that I could be helpful in that situation? Yeah, so just kind of springboard from that.
Absolutely. And along with that, there's one thing that I think you and I have talked about before to try to avoid, and that's using the why question. When you approach someone, if you use the word why, W-H-Y, you're immediately criticizing them. Even if you approach yourself with it, you probably are not going toward anything really effective. Why usually means just a slam or a criticism, or you don't like it, and conversation stops very quickly when you use the word why.
Oh, that's such good advice.
Tried to train myself to, if I use it, I've got to be very careful. What do I mean when I'm asking the word why? Because you probably don't mean why. You probably mean something else. So be more specific or more explicit, and certainly be more helpful in our approach when we're dealing with something that we want to change.
I'm hearing you say solution-oriented, in other words.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's so good.
I think even in our spiritual life, this certainly is a personal application for me, is that when I've had a loss, or when I'm in need for some kind of change, when I'm approaching God in terms of a problem, if I'm starting with the word why, it probably is not what I really want to know, because I have to smile at myself now when I'm asking the maker of all creation why he did something. I probably can hear the response of it's too much information, or you don't really want to know this. And can you reframe your question? And honestly, if you can laugh at yourself like that about what you're saying, you really realize, God, I'm unhappy with how something's going. I'm really sad. This is a loss. I wanted things to go a different way. And the same way in dealing with people when you're angry. If you're approaching it just with the why, you're probably missing the point of what you're really trying to communicate.
I just think that's one of the greatest tips and takeaways that we could have for today, because it's pretty natural. I'm thinking about husbands and wives and parents and kids, that, when somebody does something and it ticks us off, isn't a typical thing that people say is, why did you do that? It's just kind of human nature, but I think we want to be more mindful and more intentional when we're frustrated in what we say, and obviously to stay away from the word why. Well, I would love to talk more with you about anger and habits. And so could we put a pause on this and come back next time?
I look forward to it.
Okay. If you are just joining us today and have not yet seen any of the other videos for the Anger series, I invite you to go over to the channel and check those out. There's a host of tips in there. And also at PamVredevelt.com, we have a new gift printable for you. It's an infographic that actually outlines and illustrates how anger acts in the brain. So we are glad that you've joined us today, and I'm Pam Vredevelt with Dr. Swarner, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Take good care.